right, the next talk here at 10:30 is by Jay Kraft. If you've wondered about how to control your Apple II remotely, this is the one to watch.
Hi, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I'm using remote keyboard entry from a modern computer into my Apple IIs. We have some amazing emulators now for the Apple II, and by definition they can receive keyboard input from the host machine. But sometimes you need to send keystrokes to a hardware Apple II because of a device that isn't emulated, because you need to test on hardware, or just for the fun of the metal. All of the Apple II videos shown in this presentation is captured from physical Apple IIGS and Apple IIe computers. So let's talk about the individual parts. There are several homebrew and commercial ways to get keystrokes into an Apple II. USB was the ideal choice due to the popularity of keyboards, switchers, and converters. Here we have the USB to USB and USB ASC 232 from Hagstrom, no relation, Electronics. The USB ASC 232 accepts RS-232 serial input and sends USB keystrokes or mouse commands to USB-capable computers. The USB to USB is similar, except it has the USB to serial adapter built in, so it won't require a USB to serial cable to work with a modern computer's USB port. Another option, the Raspberry Pi Zero-W and the Pi 4B, have a USB gadget mode that allows them to act as a USB peripheral, in this case a keyboard. In this demo, I'm going to focus on the USB to USB, but I will mention the Pi again before we're done. Getting USB keyboard input into an Apple IIGS is easy, thanks to the Wombat from Big Mess of Wires. It even allows you to remap keys in case your USB keyboard is missing any of the keys you require, like a function key. If you want to keep using your existing ADB devices, you can get an ADB splitter. Personally, I use one to connect an ADB trackball to my Apple IIGS while using USB for the keyboard. For the 2E, I'm currently using Ian Kim's PS2 to 2E adapter, along with a small IO Gear KVM switch to convert USB to PS2. This isn't the most compact solution, and it lacks a pass-through for the 2E's internal keyboard, but it works well otherwise. I'm looking into some of the more direct USB to 2E adapters that you can purchase or assemble. Though it's not keyboard related, in order to have instant access to file changes from the modern computer, I've chosen VDrive, part of the ADT Pro suite, and Bobby Weber Manner's vServer, along with the Ethernet 2 Ethernet card. vServer runs as a Python app on your modern computer, and it shares up to 2 disk images that can be accessed from any Apple II running VDrive configured to point to it. I should add that this works in ProDOS 8 only, which is my focus here. The USB to USB works by receiving serial commands for key down, key up codes, and sends them over USB as if it were a connected keyboard. I wrote a simple program in Python to read keyboard keys and send them to the device. It has some limitations, namely with how modifier keys are entered, but I had originally intended for it to be accessed over Telnet or SSH, and thought it might be nice to visually know which keys were being triggered. So this is pretty much how things are connected. USB keystrokes can be sent to the Apple II either by being typed into the USB keyboard or by the USB to USB device. The Ethernet 2 puts the Apple II on the same network as the modern machine for files. And now for how I use it. So what do I use this for? If you're not aware, the VidHD HDMI card has some additional text modes that I thought would be fun to experiment with. This card isn't featured in any emulator yet, but I wanted it to be as easy as an emulator to try programming for it. Currently, the easiest way to access these text modes is from Protos 8 in BASIC or Assembly. I started out using MD Basic. It's a preprocessor that lets you program with more modern features, but it outputs standard AppleSoft that can run on any Apple II. Thanks to Kelvin Sherlock's Golden Gate software, you can run MD Basic as a command line application on your modern computer. Here's an example of a simple program with falling characters like a snowfall. I entered the program into VS Code on my Mac. When I'm ready to test it, I only need to copy a single line of build instructions. These will process the MD Basic into AppleSoft and copy the file to a disk image that's already mounted on my Apple II with VDrive. Then, it'll enter the keystrokes for me to run the program. In case you missed it, I'll make a small change and run it again. And one more time. I used the Merlin 32 assembler from Brutal Deluxe in a very similar way. With a single build line, I can make changes and then assemble and load or launch the program. If you're like me and need to test 100 tiny changes, it can actually add up. Here's another little visual demo. I can just copy the build line, paste it into the terminal, and hit return. And everything is assembled, copied, loaded, and listed. Let me switch resolutions so it looks right. Sometimes I want to copy and paste text from a modern computer to my Apple II. There's a great AppleSoft tutorial on hoistpoint.com. I'll just scroll down to one of the programs and copy it. And I'll simply paste it into serial key and it'll type. So it's nice to save a few keystrokes on one computer, but does it scale? The first piece of equipment you'll need to scale up the operation is called a USB Synchronous Controller. I'll include in the notes which ones I've tested. They work like a KVM switch and let you switch your keyboard among multiple computers. Where they differ is the ability to send the same keystrokes to multiple computers at one time in any combination. Secondly, you'll either need enough displays to account for every computer or an HDMI quad viewer. These let you combine up to 4 video sources into a 2x2 arrangement that feeds into a single HDMI display or a capture device. I'll repeat the paste demo from earlier, this time with 4 computers using the USB Sync controller and HDMI quad view to capture. The pause at the end of the line is a concession for the Apple IIe, which doesn't have a keyboard buffer like the GS. Notice there are 4 different speeds represented. This is a great way to visually compare performance on different hardware. We have 1 MHz up to 16 MHz represented here. Here I have some more code in Merlin, a VidHD text mode effect, that I want to test and run on 4 Apple IIs. There are no changes to the software setup. I'm just pointing the USB sync controller to 4 computers instead of 1. VDrive vServer have no problems with multiple computers reading the same file at the same time, though I wouldn't try writing that way. And I'm going to uncomment a line just to show how fast changes can be made. In the Yes You Can, but Why Do You Want To category. On the left, Questmaster on 4 different computers at once. I decided to add a C64 and PC CGA emulators below the hardware 2E and 2GS. And on the right, there's a game solved that I copied and pasted into Masquerade, and both had similar end results. It actually is kind of fun to compare the graphics across the different platforms. What about remote? If you have the previous items set up, controlling your Apple II when you're actually away from home is pretty easy. Most simply, you could just use screen sharing apps we're all familiar with to simply share your desktop, where you can view your HDMI video capture and key entering app. Or to share with others, you could do the same with the familiar screen sharing apps. If you want to go a step further, you can connect your Apple II to one of the switched power outlet devices. That way you don't have to leave your computer on in case you get the Apple II itch while away on vacation. I mentioned the Raspberry Pi at the beginning of the presentation. There's an all-in-one IP-KVM solution from TinyPilot that works great. It uses a Raspberry Pi in USB gadget mode to send keystrokes and supports HDMI capture, the USB capture device. Keyboard entry is done through a very nice looking web interface. It has some different pros and cons versus using my Python app. For example, it handles modifier keys directly, which is more convenient. But it doesn't have a default number pad, which is what my particular USB sync controller uses to switch devices. I'm sure it could be modified to add that functionality though. And thanks for watching.
Okay, thanks, Jay, for that talk. If you have questions for Jay about this talk, check out his Discord channel for this talk, and you can post them there. As a reminder, if anybody wants to talk about KansasFest on Twitter, that new thing everybody's using these days, you can use the hashtag A2KFest.